And we are live. Welcome, everyone. This is your host, Abraham El Jaguar. I will do a sound check in a few moments. First of all, this channel is proudly sponsored by Inkforged. This is a fantasy role playing game that is highly detailed, but very easy to understand. You can imbue your weapons and gear with magically charged ink. You will find a link in the description and in the pinned comment. This channel is also proudly sponsored by the Red Room Publishing. Please check out their store for exclusive tabletop RPG products. They have recently released Wretched Noir. No, New Flesh. New Flesh. Confused me. This is a future noir tabletop RPG where cyberpunk meets biological horror. You will find the link in the description and in the pinned comment as well. This channel is also proudly sponsored by Dead Tree Studios, the publishers and developers of Dames of Asstoria, a tabletop RPG where you play as monster girls, experiencing high adventure in a world that doesn't fully accept them. They have recently released Daughters of Lamb. This is a pay what you want tabletop RPG where you play as cybernetic nuns with guns, and they are looking for the pieces of their AI god. You will find it in their website. The links will be in the description and in the pinned comment. Now, a moment, please, while I check the sound. Sounds loud and clear. Let me know if it's too distorted or something. The sound looks sounds pretty good. All right. Perhaps I will move the microphone just a little bit to the left, so that it's not that loud. All right. Uh, moving on. This video was inspired by my friend and channel member Beyond Fantasy. Huh. Okay, let me zoom myself, maximize myself. Maximize. Okay, so yes, this video was inspired by my friend and channel member Beyond Fantasy. And he was asking how to. Well, he basically said that he, how can you say, admired or liked it how I learned many tabletop RPG systems. So he was asking about that. How do you learn a tabletop RPG system quite quickly? So I am going to give my thoughts on that. Let's wait for a few moments until more people arrive. I don't know if Beyond Fantasy will be able to make it. Um, Even though it was his idea, sometimes he gets a bit busy at this time. So let's wait for a couple of minutes. For this video, I am using Weird Frontiers. Let me see if I can get it into focus. Oh, as you can see, it's basically um, Wild West, Lulu or Cthulhu in the cover. It's the texture is really nice, and I like it here. It says hell is empty and all the devils are here. Hell is empty and all the devils are here on earth. This is mm, how are you try to get that into proper focus? Well, it says weird frontiers. Weird frontier. Welcome, Beyond Fantasy. Welcome. So this is a very big, very large tome. Mm, let's see if I can refocus the camera. Oh, 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 camera over here. Camera, can you move over here? No, this I'm telling you, this AI sometimes gets on my nerves. AI, stop it, AI. Well, I have to leave it like that, right? AI, you're misbehaving once more. But okay, some people that perhaps are just getting into the hobby or want to switch to another tabletop RPG, could, could end up looking at these books. They look like encyclopedias, like dictionaries, right? And they could be thinking, wow, how am I going to learn that tabletop RPG quickly? Yeah, bad camera, misbehaving. So I am here to give you my thoughts on those things. The fastest method to learning any tabletop RPG that, if you don't mind purchasing a module, let's say that you really like a tabletop RPG, such as this one, and you say, how can I get started right away? How can I learn how to play it? This book, in the case of this book, it comes with a few modules inside, a few adventures, but you could also purchase other adventures if you want. And this is not necessary, this is not obligatory, this is just an idea. You take an adventure or a module and just read it as a game master, just read through it, and every single question that you have in your mind that arises in your thoughts as you are reading the adventure or the module, how do I attack? How does the player character attack in this situation? How do they carry out skill checks? Then go to the book because, oh, there is this combat scene in this module. You go to the book, to the index or the table of contents, attack, melee attack, and you read how to do the attack. Oh, I see. You keep on reading the module. Oh, it sounds like in this part of the module, the player characters perhaps decide to climb. How do you climb? How do you do skill checks or ability tests? And you look, welcome, Full Metal State. Since you two are called Josh, I'm going to refer to you by Beyond Fantasy and Full Metal State, because otherwise I'm going to be like Josh. So Full Metal State, welcome. And so as we proceed, you take your module, your adventure, and perhaps you read. This place looks like the player characters are going to be using skill checks to climb, to hide, to sneak, to read some weird text. So you go to the book, you go to the table of contents, and you see how to learn how to do skill checks. So you can use the entire module like that. That's the great thing about pre-written modules. You can take any section of those as a learning experience, and even the setting. Like, wait a minute, the characters are moving through this town. Where is that place? You go to the setting book, you go to the section. Oh, it's that place. So it's all about learning like little bits of the tabletop RPG that you want to learn. But that's one approach, right? That one particular approach. You take a module, and as you learn the adventure or module, as you read it, you start to look for those solutions. How do you attack? How do you do skill checks? How do you use magic? How do the monsters attack? You go to the index table of content of your tabletop RPG of choice, and problem solved. But some of you could be thinking, well, that sounds good, but I don't want to purchase any modules, or the tabletop RPG that I have doesn't come with adventure modules, etc. This AI camera is. Let me see if I can uh, refocus it. Okay, refocus over here. Can you refocus? No, the AI isn't cooperating. I wanted to be at the center of the screen, but we shall proceed like this. So okay, every single tabletop RPG in existence, every single tabletop RPG book is structured quite similarly. You have the character creation section, you have the mechanics for combat, for skill checks. Everything else is very easy to learn from there. You only need to know how to create your character, the mechanics, the core mechanics, and everything else concerning monsters, magic, setting. Everything else is so easy to understand after that. Just focus on character creation and the core mechanics. Now, beyond fantasy, since you suggested this topic, do you have like any questions or doubts about how to proceed learning a tabletop RPG? And of course, this applies to any system because you have very complex systems like Hackmaster, the current edition of Hackmaster, super complex, very rich, very fulfilling experience, I would say. But not everybody is into those sorts of simulationist type of experiences. Mm, Now, when it comes to more rules light or streamlined tabletop RPGs, they are, of course, considerably easier to learn. Like Quick and Classic, right? Like I showed you the other time, very thin book. And even within the how thin that book is, you only need to learn like 2 or 3 pages to understand the core system. It is so easy to learn. But do not feel intimidated by any tabletop RPG out there. Every tabletop RPG has the character creation process, the core mechanics, and all of the other stuff is derived from there. But I highly recommend that approach where you take the adventure module that you wish to run, you start reading through it, and that's how you learn a new system. And to dovetail a bit on other videos that I have done on similar subjects, not entirely unrelated, um, do not feel obligated to use all of the rules. Let's see, Beyond Fantasy is saying something. Let me see if I can highlight the comment. What is this? Oh no, what is this? Okay, well, Beyond Fantasy says Torchbearer Second Edition has a lot of new language. How do I learn some new terms in tabletop RPGs that I've never heard of before? In those cases, in the book, there is usually the typical glossary or core concepts or key concepts section. They should have that. If they are using a lot of new terminology, I would consider it an error if they didn't include a section like a glossary or concepts. For example, I'm currently reviewing Ultra Modern 5e for Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, and you have an entire section dedicated to explaining wormholes and time displacement and who knows what. So if Torchbearer has a new language, there should be a section detailing that new language. If not, the easiest way. There is no easy way around it when it comes to sidelining, or how you say flanking those concepts. You need to learn that new terminology. When you see a new term or word, and you are like, "What is that?" The book really needs to tell you what that means. There is it will have to be a very low quality book that doesn't tell you what those concepts mean, and you have to be patient. You could also, this is another good tip. You could have a notepad, a sheet of paper or something, or if you're using your computer, you can have the notepad application open. And when you find a term that you do not understand, write it down, type it down, or write it down, and leave it like that. You don't understand it, just leave it there, written. And as you continue reading the book, later on, it will be revealed. The meaning behind that word or concept will be revealed definitely. I've had some, not very few, but some situations when I am reading a tabletop RPG book and they come up with this wording, this particular concept, and they do not tell you what it is. One example, and that book isn't exactly like rules heavy. Choro Gaiden, Choro Gaiden, which is a Japanese horror tabletop RPG. They told you something. I forget the name of the subsystem, but they mentioned that, and I was like, I've never read that before. It didn't say anything about the concept at the start of the book, or the pages that I have just read do not mention anything about that concept. But in a couple of pages, they reveal what that concept is. But I just left it floating there, right? Like concept X. Let's call it concept X. So I just left it floating there. And when I read later on, they tell you concept X is actually this. And I was like, so that is it. And that is actually something that I criticized in that tabletop RPG of Choro Guide. And I said, if you're going to be introducing a new concept, tell the reader right away what that concept is. Don't wait a couple of pages to inform them, because I can only imagine someone that is switching systems but is perhaps not accustomed to do that, or someone that is just learning tabletop RPGs, they see those new concepts and they're going to be, what, who, what does this mean? And do you have other questions related to that beyond fantasy? And also, Full Metal State, what about you? Do you have like some thoughts on how to learn new tabletop RPG systems? In the case of Weird Frontiers, this mammoth tome, this huge tome, the character creation section has so many classes, but you don't need to understand all of them. When you decide to create characters with your players, just focus on what they decide to choose and just focus on the first level of each class. It's unlikely that they're going to level up throughout the first session. Mm, it's also important to become aware that many powers, feats, abilities, skills, not all of them will be used during gameplay. And as I always say, roleplay solves everything. If you're running a game for your players and one of the players decides to attempt something and you haven't read the rules section for that particular ability, skill, power, spell, taking the role playing game context into consideration, the context and the role play, the fiction, just handle it like that. Judgment call. Let's say Beyond Fantasy. I love that idea. Yeah, the Full Metal State. So as I was saying, many of the things you don't need to learn them right away. But if the players decide to use something that you have no idea how to, they use the grappling rules. A lot of people forget about the grappling rules because they are not that common. The most common attacks are related to using your weapons, casting a spell, but only very few players actually exploit or take advantage of grappling. So, in that case, if you don't know how grappling works in a particular system, handle it as a game master. If the player decided to jump at the lizard man in front of him, trying to put him in a chokehold, if the player caught the lizard man unaware, it was an success, automatic success. If not, you can also use other mechanics you are familiar with, like using a saving throw. For this instance, for this moment, let's say Beyond Fantasy says, I usually write down too many notes when learning a new tabletop RPG. Well, if it works for you, that's great. But if not, if you feel like it's too bothersome, try to stick to a few uh, core concepts like, oh, this I have to remember. Try to remove those things that are not as important. Let's say Full Metal State says, I'll usually read through skill checks and combat options a couple of times and think of ways to apply them while role playing. That's a really good approach, and it connects with what I have said. It's a great way to understand the core of the system. Skill checks, and let's say Full Metal State also says, with crunchier systems, I would recommend practicing the mechanics with mock situations between players. That's why I recommend solo role playing. Many tabletop RPGs can be easily learned by running a solo session. You want to see how combat works? Set up a few characters and have them go at it. Have them fight. If you want to see how traps would work, just move the character through the trapped area and make those saving throws, skill checks, roll damage, and you will understand how to apply those mechanics. So when I was saying about the context, you can handle everything through roleplay. And this ties directly to the origin of tabletop RPGs from Dave Arneson. Dave Arneson, the father, the true father of tabletop RPGs. Remember that Gary Gygax did not create tabletop RPGs. He took Dave Arneson's chaotic notes, disorganized notes, and gave them a structure. But he never understood role playing. Never. He attempted so many times with Rob Kuntz, never got the concept. But going back to the original idea of Dave Arneson, depending on the situation. It would come up with judgment calls with the variations of rules on the spot. Let's say Beyond Fantasy says, I usually put on some lo-fi music and a timer. That way I can study in 20-minute bursts with 5 minute breaks. Ah, okay. Well, if that strategy breaks for you, breaks, works for you, that could be a good way of organizing your thoughts when you are learning the tabletop RPG of choice. So as I was saying, Dave Arneson, if the players attempted some strange, unusual maneuver, tactic, attack, the use of a spell, he would come up with a way on how to use it on the spot. Very different from board games and video games. Some people do not understand this difference yet. In when it comes to video games, you cannot attempt something that has not been programmed into the game. When it comes to board games, you cannot attempt something that has not been factored into the rules. But with tabletop RPGs, it is not so. There is limitless potential to tabletop RPGs. And don't get me wrong, I enjoy video games, I enjoy board games. What I enjoy about board games and video games is that, oh, by the way, if I sound too loud, let me know because I think the sound is okay, but you never know, right? But like I said, I enjoy video games because I have those limitations and you work within those limitations to carry out your attacks, do your explorations, investigations. So that's part of the fun that, I managed to do that within the programmed system. But in other cases, it's a bit disappointing. Like I have mentioned in the case of Baldur's Gate the first Baldur's Gate, I was always quite disappointed because I couldn't climb trees and structures and swim in the lakes. It was not programmed. You were limited to moving the character on the plains, grass. So that was very disappointing. And when it comes to board games, as I have said, for example, on the board, sometimes you see, thank you for the confirmation of the sound, Full Metal State. In board games, you try to beat the game by working within those limitations, but sometimes there could be a bit of a frustration. You see the board and you see like a flask and you think, oh, maybe that flask contains acid or some sort of flaming oil or whatnot, and you want to pick up the flask or jar or whatever. It's not in the rules. Sorry, that's for the decoration purposes. Or you're moving through the board and you see a window on the board. I want to go out the window. Maybe you're moving through a castle. I want to go out the window and climb the walls of the castle to get to the other side. No, that is not allowed in the rules of the board game. Let's say Beyond Fantasy says, I swing from the chandelier and throw my dagger from inside of my utility belt inside my coat at the cultist leader below. Yeah, huh? Yeah, that's roleplay, perfect roleplay, describing your actions in the present, in the now. Absolutely perfect. And in board games, unless they allow that, it is not possible. Huzzah! It is not possible to do so. And if you start to tweak the board game too much, you're going to end up with a role playing game because you're trying to cover every single situation. You might as well play a tabletop RPG. And so when it comes to learning new systems, we have so many good ideas, right? Mentioned by Beyond Fantasy, Full Metal State, always keeping your thoughts organized, um, going through the combat system, the skill checks, doing like a little mock battle if you want, making those roll as a game master so that way you are not caught unaware when your players are using those rules. And as I have mentioned, and I mention always, every single time, well, not every single time, but most of the time, roleplay solves everything. If you are running your system and they come up with, oh, this rule that you do not know how it works, handle it via context. If it's logical that the attack is going to hit, the attack hits. If not, misses completely. Now, when it comes to the campaign settings, some campaign settings for different tabletop RPGs, they are just so huge. They are huge. So you could feel a bit overwhelmed. Do not learn all of the game world. Just learn those areas, districts, segments where the player characters are most likely to move through. Let's say that you're playing in the Forgotten Realms, Dungeons and Dragons Forgotten Realms. What town are they moving through or city? Are they moving through Waterdeep? Does the adventure feature Waterdeep? Perhaps it features Baldur's Gate, any of those places. Then just stick to learning about those places. If the players suddenly decide to go completely off rails for whatever reason, just roleplay. If they go into a place and you don't know the official version for that place, for that town, for that adventure site, make things on the spot, and later on, you can harmonize what you have just made up or created with the official version if you want. It is still your game world. And Beyond Fantasy says, how does one organize notes? I feel that organization is very nuanced, as what works for one person might not work for another. And you could have categories or columns, like, for example, mechanic questions or mechanic concepts. Like, you don't understand some mechanic concepts, you could have that written down in a sheet of paper, and you write all of those concepts that you do not understand the meaning of later to later on understand what they mean and how to use them within the rules. You could also have another category for enemy attacks, right? So it's all about categorization. I have to use OneNote. My handwriting sucks. My handwriting is also pretty bad, pretty ugly. I still understand it. I understand it, but it can get a bit messy. And so I would recommend Beyond Fantasy when it comes to organization. It's all about categories. What fits into combat? What fits into skill checks? What fits into monsters? So create those categories and have fun with it as well. Full Metal State Dimensions might be a bad comparison, but I look at it as the way games are rendered. The game will only load the information that will be used within the zone. Yes, that's like a video game way of looking at it. You're not going to be loading all of the rule set in a particular session. There are many spells, attacks, abilities that not all of the players are going to be employing, especially if you have different character classes. When it comes to enemy attacks, not all of the attacks are going to be employed. So it's all about feeling that security, security and comfort on the part of the game master, knowing that if the players mention something that you haven't read in the rules, you can handle it via roleplay, via the context. And going back to organization, definitely Beyond Fantasy, keep those categories, attacks, character creation, skill check. If needed, perhaps that could be a bit of going overboard, but if needed, you could have like separate sheets for each category. That way you won't lose track of things. But after a while, after learning various systems, you will realize that you will need to keep notes less and less as time goes on. Because just to put it into context, I am very surprised with Beyond Fantasy because he has just started to learn tabletop RPGs 2 or 3 years ago, and his learning experience, his pace has been exceptional. That is, he got immediately into role playing, into being in the now, in the present. He can role play in first person, third person. So it doesn't surprise me that sometimes Beyond Fantasy you could feel a bit like tables are my friend. That sometimes you could feel, oh, I'm having difficulty with learning these concepts. Well, that's because you are just starting to learn this hobby. Um, it reminds me, like when I started to learn many years back. Well, how was I? 14 years old. About 14 years old, more or less. I also thought about that. How can I switch between systems? I remember when I started to play with Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Second Edition, and when I saw the first White Wolf game, it completely baffled me because, but it's also the fault of White Wolf because they wanted to separate themselves from other tabletop RPGs. So they started with the whole storyteller nonsense. It's not a game master, it's a storyteller. You're not telling stories about your characters, you're experiencing the game world as your characters. You're not going to be like, the vampire went into the nightclub and then he seduced a woman and he took her to his apartment and he started to suck her blood. No, no, no. You're describing your action. And then maybe you need to make a roll, or depending on the context, maybe it's an automatic success, etc. And it says Beyond Fantasy says AD&D is nice. Uh-huh. I love it. It's one of my favorite editions. And Full Metal State. That's awesome. The more systems you explore, the more similarities you'll come across. Exactly. Welcome, Grimsley. Welcome. Yes, I agree, Josh. I agree. Now, Josh, I meant Full Metal State, Josh. Full Metal State. Mm, what do you first think when we played the Dark and Terrible campaign? Did you, how you say, have trouble adjusting to the system because it's a very rules light, very unique system of one role, or did you immediately thought on how you say understand how to play it? Because you also did an amazing job the entire campaign. The Dark and Terrible campaign, it was incredible. One of my joys of having played in my RPG career. Let's say Grimsley said, I used to play Dungeons and Dragons and sometimes mostly homebrew stuff. Hmm. And were you a game master, Grimsley, or were you a player? But yes, the more systems that you learn, the easier it becomes to learn so many other systems. The most important part is learning how to roleplay. So yes, beyond fantasy, even though you could have some problems and sometimes organizing things or learning new concepts, Dark and Terrible sounds awesome. Yeah, I came up with that name because the name of the campaign setting is it's King for a Day. And there are so many grim situations. Just as Full Metal State, the campaign had a very grim ending. In order to avoid spoilers, it's in the front of my channel, the Dark and Terrible campaign. The ending for that campaign. Mm, grim dark, very grim dark. And so, let's say Full Metal State. That system was great. It really allows for focus on the role playing, which was great. Yes, it's my favorite rules light system so far. The Quick and Classic. I am actually considering, but it's like an idea that I have. Sometimes I have like these little gaps between my many other duties, and I'm considering. Well, I could run like a Quick and Classic campaign once more, just perhaps an hour or an hour and a half session once each week to have something to showcase on the YouTube channel using the Asteria setting. So definitely, anyone who is watching this video or Full Metal State, well, Beyond Fantasy, I know that Beyond Fantasy is always ready to game. He's like a super role player, and how you say, very enthusiastic. But in the case of Full Metal State, I know he's running a couple of games. He's a game master for two games. But if you, Full Metal State, or anyone else, have time, I think it would be great to start a quick and classic campaign using the Asteria setting. Beyond Fantasy, would you? I can count on you, right? And that's not a professional game. That is, I'm not going to be charging for it because, as many of you know, I am a professional game master and I charge for games. But right now, because of my time limit constraints, etc., I'm only running a single professional game here in Mexico. But this game will be completely free of charge, and we will be taking on the Asteria campaign setting. So I guess I can count on Beyond Fantasy and Full Metal State. Excellent. Full Metal State, if you ever have free time, this is the same system that you used in the Dark and Terrible campaign. You already know what it is. You describe your actions, and I make the single roll. It's all about focusing on roleplay. And Grimsley, if you ever want to try tabletop RPGs and you're not, but you're living in Japan, right? We'll have to do some gymnastics when it comes to timing. But anyone else um, that wants to play a session live here on the channel once a week, 1 hour and a half a week, definitely let me know. Contact me via email or whatever, and we'll get things going. Right now, we have Beyond Fantasy interested on that. So yes, that's an idea, an idea, right? But yes, and like Full Metal State said, if you want to learn tabletop RPGs, learning many new systems sometimes makes it actually easier. Uh, you find concepts that are shared. There is only so many ways in which you can play around with the dice rolls, with the drawing of cards in those systems, or in diceless systems. There are just so many ways to understand how a similar mechanic is used in tabletop RPGs, in other tabletop RPGs. Typical D20 based systems, right? You have the roll above a certain number. In other cases, roll below a certain number. And Beyond Fantasy says, I guess it would be Konbanwa over there. Yeah. Mm. And it's not that difficult to learn new tabletop RPG systems. What is actually difficult because of the Gygaxian distortion, rather, is learning how to roleplay. And some people do not get it because it could be based on two obstacles, an ego, because suddenly you take this guy that has been playing 30, 40 years, tabletop RPGs for 30, 40 years, and you tell him, hey, you have never roleplayed. You were just telling a story. You were describing things that you were going to do in the future. I am going to swing my sword. Well, that's in the future. You are going to swing your sword. But are you swinging your sword in the present, in the now? Are you swinging it now? You see? And once you get into that mindset of being in the present, in the now, it is magical. Each tabletop RPG session, you end up transported into an amazing world, incredible world of limitless potential. Let's say beyond fantasy. I forget how to say good morning in Japanese. It wasn't it Ohio? I think it's Ohio. I think it's Ohio. I think, but yes, if you have to learn a new system, definitely learn how to create the character, learn the core of the skills, the attacks, but most importantly, get into that roleplay mindset. I do this, I do that, and the game master will ask for a roll, or we rather will call for a roll, or will give you an automatic success. So I think that that basically covers everything. And beyond fantasy, do you have any other like questions related to this learning process of switching between tabletop RPGs? And definitely, when let's say Full Metal State has something. Some systems have make role playing more difficult. You just have to figure out ways with your group to have the system mechanics fade to the background. hmm Because it happens on a second plane. That is our roles. They are just there to solve the situations that are uncertain. Just like I've mentioned this in another video, like breathing. When we breathe, we are breathing air, but we are not focused on that. The body breathes automatically. You don't need to constantly focus on breathing. The breathing. It's not like breathing. Well, on breathing. The same thing happens with the mechanics in tabletop RPGs, the dice rolls, the drawing of cards, the comparing values in diceless systems. It is just there to solve the roleplay. The roleplay drives the entire thing. You take this action. Is the outcome uncertain? Then you make a roll. Or based on context, something happens. As simple as that. Let's say Beyond Fantasy has a question. What is a good way to learn a system for a group with solo play? A good way to learn a system for a group with solo play? I don't understand the question. You mean like a cooperative experience that is a solo tabletop RPG that you play without a game master, or what are you referring to? Because yes, a good way to learn a system for a group with solo play. Yes, because there could be various interpretations when it comes to solo tabletop RPGs, and you want to turn them into a cooperative experience. Well, it's the same thing. Basically, you describe the actions of the participants. The tricky thing is that I would recommend that at the start you assign a single person to be the one interpreting the results of the oracles, the game master emulator, whatever tool that you are using. Because otherwise, maybe you mentioned, come on, guys, let's go inside of the temple. And everybody's like, yeah, let's go. I proceed into the temple. I follow Tommy into the temple, and they're all walking, right? Let's say Beyond Fantasy says, for example, if I wanted to learn Torchbearer Second Edition for a group, how would I learn it by self via solo play? That way I can apply the rules for a group. Yes, it's very simple. You take Torchbearer Second Edition and you use, I would recommend TriCube Tales. It's a free to download Game Master emulator, unless you already have your favorite Game Master emulator of choice or whatever. In Drive RPG, you have the free Game Master emulator, TriCube Tales, and just read the how to use it. You make the roll every single time there is something uncertain. Like maybe you decided that the first scene, maybe you use the TriCube Tales to generate the first scene. You generate it using cards. You draw the combination of cards, and it says, um, "Let me make something up." Like temple slimy. Uh, Tommy the fighter stands in front of the temple, whose walls are covered with gray slime. And now, as Tommy, I bring out my torch, light it up, hold it with my left hand, pull out my battle axe with my right hand, and proceed carefully inside. Now you make your roll to determine what is inside. Maybe you obtain the result of a large corridor. Maybe it's a room. You also usually generate the elements. What is inside that room? Perhaps you think, I look around to see if there is furniture inside of the room. And now you obtain the result of table, fountain, chest. So it's all about describing your action and making the rolls to see what you discover through those actions. Let's say Beyond Fantasy says, I think I have some Rory Story cubes around the house somewhere. They are in a box in an attic upstairs. I've also heard great things about the Rory Story cubes, and there are so many of them, right? Many categories. There are like horror story cubes and fantasy story cubes. It's all about what you find fun and easy to use. In my case, sometimes I'm in the mood of using the monster of a book, the solo adventuring toolkit. Other times I just want to use the TriCube emulator. Other times I want to use Mythic. So it's all about what you find entertaining, fun, useful, efficient, very efficient and effective. You have Batman story cubes. Wow, I didn't know there were Batman story cubes. That's very specific. They should also have Superman story cubes, right? But yes, when it comes to learning solo RPGs to play them with your group, very simple beyond fantasy, very simple. Describe the action of the character and the oracle, whatever you are using, the dice, the generator, will determine the contents of the room, of the corridor, and Beyond Fantasy says Mythic has a rules light oracle system now, doesn't it? Aha, that's one of the strengths of Mythic. There are so many like it has a modular structure. You don't need to use all of it. You can actually run Mythic just with the yes or no oracle. And like I said, in order not to lose that roleplay within your sessions, do not ask questions. Do not ask, is the corridor trapped? Right? I look at the walls, the ceiling, and the floor of the corridor to spot or see something suspicious or out of place. Now we want to know if there is something suspicious or out of place. You make your roll on the oracle. Maybe it's a yes. There is actually something suspicious. Maybe it's a no. Nothing suspicious whatsoever. So that is up to you to decide. It depends on various things. If this is the entrance to the temple, you're walking in the first room or through the first corridor, and there are no blood stains, no corpses, no damage to the walls, and it says that there is nothing suspicious, then there is most likely not going to be a trap. There isn't any trap whatsoever there. But what if you obtain the result of a blood stain, right? Like a little blood stain on the wall? Then I would make a find the traps check. or come up with a brilliant solution. What if you see the blood on the left wall? That means somebody died while sticking to the left wall. So it's logical to stick to the right wall because there's no blood there. You stick to the right wall. You make your roll on the oracle with you adjust it to high likelihood of being. For example, you could say, "I stick to the right wall, attempting to avoid any traps that could be present in the corridor." And that makes you think if you make it across safely. You make your roll. If it's a yes, excellent. If it's a no, suddenly part of the wall opens up and a guillotine blade flies straight at your head. Then I would handle it as a saving throw. Or if you decide to take another approach, you could also use your disarm traps or whatever if you have that particular skill set, ability, power. Depends on the game, right? So I think it's very easy to run a solo game in order to learn how to use a system for your group beyond fantasy. I hope that answered your question. Mm, I think that about covers it, but there are still many concepts that we could explore. Does anybody else have any question about this or something to add? Not only questions, but further thoughts like Full Metal State or Beyond Fantasy. Because that's the fascinating thing about tabletop RPGs. You can explore so much about them. You can explore everything about them. You simply cannot run out of material. Just take a look at my channel. I have a tabletop RPG video almost every single day. Let's say Canticle of Restlessness. I want to use solo play to populate a town full of survivalists. That is, that is certainly doable. With the yes or no oracles, you could determine if there is an abundance or a lack of certain resources, like firewood, uh, medicinal herbs, animals to hunt. You could use the oracles to determine all of that and determine the personalities of the people within the town. And Beyond Fantasy, he says, basically, you could use solo play to test out a tabletop RPG to learn it for a group. Exactly, exactly, exactly. Each one having a story full of traumas. Uh-huh. There is actually the Walking Dead universe on my left, the Walking Dead universe tabletop RPG, and the Electric State have some very interesting survivalist tables. So many ways of generating characters with issues, with emotional baggage sometimes, and also many things related to survival. So beyond fantasy, yeah. Um, if you haven't, if you ever want to purchase the Walking Dead Universe RPG or the Electric State, they have some very good tables for survival type situations. But if not, like I said, the Oracle can pretty much cover everything with those simple yes or no prompts. And in the case of the Mythic Game Master emulator, you have so many words related to survivalism as well. The solo adventuring toolkit at the very back, well, not at the very back, but near the end of the book, you have things related to biomes, weather, the attitudes of various non-player characters. That you have that AI system that is further expanded, greatly expanded in the Flex AI guidebook. We can generate the personalities, the agendas, the responses, more than anything, the responses, the motives of the non-player characters. And Canticle of Restlessness said, "The Walking Dead as a series, comic, and show is very inspirational." Yes, I agree. Mm, I didn't like the later seasons for the series, but the comic book, I always regret. I hope that Humble Bundle eventually brings that bundle back, but there was this bundle that had all of the Walking Dead comic books so far that at that particular time, the entire series from start to ending. And I always thought, oh, I missed that opportunity because it's one of those things that you live, oh, well, maybe I'll buy it. And then, okay, I'm going to buy it. Oh, the offer is over. And it says, and yeah, the ad symbol. Yeah. Another good survivalist tabletop RPG. I was going to mention it. Well, that's a bit more. more over the top, more towards post-apocalypse, mutants, and whatnot, whatnot. The Excavator monthly zine for the mutant epoch, it has a lot of good material when it comes to survivalism as well. Yeah, spread the power of the at symbol. And you need those personalities, those agendas when it comes to non-player characters populating a town or a city, because otherwise, how are you going to interact with them? Even if you have to generate those personalities, those agendas, those intentions on the spot, you need those things to get the conversation going. That is, when there is a conversation in the game between the player character and the non-player character, you interact with the non-player character, you make your rolls to see what that non-player character is going to mention. In the case of the Tricube Tales, there are ways to generate, and pretty much any table can give you a topic that the non-player character is going to talk about. And of course, you can always consider that those non-player characters, as you interact with them, they could have hidden agendas. And Tentacle of Restlessness says, yeah, it's better when there are background layers to these people's stories. Because what if you obtain the result of friendly, right? That character is interacting with you in a friendly way. But are those the true intentions of that character, right? You can only figure that out as you continue with the game. Perhaps later on, through the results of the oracles and whatnot, it will turn out that that character is a backstabber. And Canticle of Restlessness says, with solo play, I could personalize the entire lore dump encyclopedias, and I would never get players to read. Yes, the lore dump is an important consideration because uh, players don't usually don't want to just sit there and listen to something. Or well, there could be players that want to like have an ASMR experience and fall almost asleep as the game master unpacks paragraphs and paragraphs of backstory, but you usually don't want that. Mostly because the way that time proceeds in tabletop RPGs is considerably different from our time. In tabletop RPGs, when the character decides to repair a vehicle, it could be several hours, right, of game time. But we are not going to spend several hours in real time repairing the vehicle. So when it comes to learning those things, instead of having those lore dump situations with your players, summarize to the essentials. Because in that game world, they have all the time, well, a lot more time to spend hours pouring through some sort of tome or listening to a legend and whatnot. Mm, I think that pretty much covers everything when it comes to learning tabletop RPGs quickly. Oh, let's say Canticle. Never met a player willing to be hypnotized, but I only play online. There are some. You would be surprised. There are some players that are just falling asleep. I could mention a few sessions, but I think they are pretty irrelevant. But here in YouTube, you had sessions where the game master just kept on yapping and yapping and yapping and yapping, and the players were like, but they were comfortable. They were like falling asleep, and then oh, yes, but usually if you're role playing, you usually don't want that unless you want to role play as someone falling asleep now. Well, thank you for watching this live stream. And thank you, Beyond Fantasy, Full Metal State, Grimsley, Cantico. You will come to time next session. Yeah, yeah. You will arrive on time. Yeah, of course. And thanks to everyone else for watching this live stream. Yeah, you can use all sorts of hypnotic suggestions. And thank you so much to those of you that are going the extra mile to support the channel. If anyone else wishes to further support the channel, consider joining as a member using the super thanks button, like, subscribe. Take a look at the information in the description, the pinned comment. This has been your host, Abraham L. Jaguar, a professional game master. And remember, roleplay solves everything. Once again, for those of you that are interested in participating with roleplay in an online campaign, I am thinking about creating a new group just to an hour and a half a week. So if you have like the time, it's a very simple system, quick and classic. You have to learn very minimal. You could consider it a diceless system on the part of the players because I would be making the role. for the players. So you would describe your action, and I will make a roll for the entire combat. It's that simple of a system, or the skill check depending on the situation. But you need to like appear on camera, and definitely you need to role play in present, in the now. I do this, I do that, I attempt this. Not the I will. I'm gonna. Uh, oh, I want my character to no in present in now role play, playing a role and playing a game. So once again, thank you all. Thank you Beyond Fantasy for bringing this topic to my awareness. And have a great rest of your evening, day, wherever you all are. See you later.